Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to the first session on the discussion related to economic survey which was recently published by Government of India for the year 22 and 23. Now before starting the discussion, here is a very important announcement. I'm pretty sure all of you have seen this video already, which basically lays out that starting next week, rather than having weekly updates for you regarding the economic articles which have appeared in various newspapers, we are going to start with a new initiative which will replace Economy This Week. The new initiative is Indian Economy Essentials. Under this Indian Economy Essentials, we'll be uploading the videos on daily basis based on the recently discussed articles in various newspapers. Now many of you will ask me, sir, why have you shifted from a weekly update model to, let's say, a daily update model? The reason is very simple. The current affairs is very dynamic and multiple articles keep on appearing in the newspapers. Now in order to give you relevant information, I repeat, in order to give you the relevant information on day-to-day basis, where we are going to cover basically the important concepts within this article, we have decided to have this Indian Economy Essentials on day-to-day basis rather than having an Economy This Week on weekly basis. So be sure that you will hit the subscribe button and ensure that you will be able to get access to these videos. Access in the sense you will get the notification of all these videos that will start appearing on everyday basis in our YouTube channel. So with this caveat, let me start. Economic survey for the current financial year. Basically understand this. Government during the budget session will introduce two very important sets of documents. One is budget, the coverage of which we already have done. If you have yet to see that, or if you have not seen that video, please go to the live section in our YouTube channel, BYJU'S Exam Prep YouTube channel, and you will see a discussion on the budget on the same day, that is 1st of February. In addition to the budget, the second very important document the government provides during the budget session is economic survey. The difference is very simple here. Economic survey will tell you in the last 1 year what has happened in the Indian economy, and the budget will tell you what the government will do in the next one financial year. So rather than going chapter wise, we will be covering the economic survey the concept wise, or let's say the topic wise. And understand this carefully. You people are lucky if you're writing the exams this year. Now many of you ask me, sir, why? Why do you say I'm lucky? I feel I'm unlucky, but why do you say I'm lucky? Very simple. You're lucky because generally the practice of Government of India is to provide economic survey in 2 volumes. But unlike the previous practice, right now the Government of India shifted to publishing economic survey in only 1 volume. And the luck will be multiplied by knowing the fact that earlier when 2 volumes were given, the first volume used to have lot of concepts and not the general concepts that are discussed in the books, but different concepts altogether. But because you have only 1 volume now, not many concepts are discussed, just it is a factual data which has been provided with certain concepts here and there, sprinkled concepts here and there. So wherever it is necessary for UPSC, let's have a look at the concepts as well. And just as I mentioned, we will have the coverage of economic survey sector wise or topic wise rather than going chapter wise. And the other reason is very simple. In this economic survey, a lot of data is provided. For example, if I take a chapter such as banking, that is specifically the coverage of monetary policy, lot of data regarding how much is the money supply, how much is M0, how much is M3, etc., etc. A lot of data, so around 70 to 80 pages worth of data has been provided. Is it relevant for UPSC? Answer is simply no. It is not relevant. UPSC is not going to test you what has happened to the number of deposits held in the bank. UPSC is not going to ask that question. Even if they ask the question, some of you, I'm pretty sure, will ask me, sir, what if they ask? I don't want to leave that question, but you are asking me not to read that data from economic survey. My dear, you tell me, what is the deposit held in the banking sector last year? Last year in the sense, let's say you're writing the exams in the month of May, which is next financial year. So from that viewpoint, I'm talking. So you're writing the exams in the month of May, which is the financial year 24. Budget gives you the data for 22 and 23. Don't you think by the time you are writing the exam, the data would have already changed? Data would be completely different. So that's a reason, do not try to by heart these tables. Data UPSC doesn't ask. But certain relevant data, wherever it is necessary, whichever is required for UPSC, I will tell you, don't worry. So starting with the coverage of inflation, we will go to agriculture sector. Both are interrelated. Then we'll go to fiscal policy. Then we'll discuss monetary policy. And finally, we will have a look at certain discussions that has been provided in one more very important chapter, that is second chapter in the economic survey, that is a medium term outlook for the Indian economy. So let me start with this caveat. Let me start the discussion of the first sector or first concept in the economic survey, that is inflation. I'm pretty sure all of you know what is inflation. I believe, at least I believe, or I just hope that you know what is the concept of inflation. And inflation in the domestic market, I'm talking about Indian economy now, is basically measured under two heads. One is called as a WPI, wholesale price index, and the second one is called as a CPI, consumer price index. And day for yesterday as well as yesterday, there has been a lot of discussion related to what has been the inflation in the domestic market, RBI changing the repo rate, concerned about core rate, etc., etc. Very, very relevant for UPSC examination. Now try and understand this. As per the Monetary Policy Framework Agreement, Reserve Bank of India is supposed to maintain the inflation rate at around 4%. Rather than saying around 4%, let's say 4%. But under the MPFA, there is a bandwidth that is available for RBI. It can allow the inflation to reach a maximum level of 6% or to hit the lowest level of 2%. Now, what has been the inflationary trend in the last 1 year? You will realize that both WPI as well as CPI, I hope you understand, both WPI as well as CPI, both have been, for majority period of the time, have been more than 4% in the domestic market. The reason is very simple. There was a pandemic. The pandemic basically disrupted supply chain systems in the global market. As we were coming out of the pandemic, the Russia-Ukraine war again basically affected the supply chain in the international market. And whenever there is a disruption in the supply chain in the international market, rest assured, India will be affected. Now many of you will ask me, sir, how? How do you say if there is a disruption in the supply chain market, how do you come to a conclusion that Indian economy will be disrupted? For a very simple reason. Post-globalization or implementation of globalization reforms, there have been a lot of trade relations that is existing between Indian economy as well as the rest of the world. And as a result of this, the pandemic as well as the Russia-Ukraine war has affected the supply chains in the international market. Now, important point to note here is inflation can be caused because of supply side factors as well as demand side factors. It should be very clear for you people. Right? Inflation can be caused because of supply side factors as well as demand side factors. And in recent times, both the factors have contributed to inflationary trends in the domestic market. But the survey says, if you look at the factors which have affected, which have caused inflation, it is basically the set of supply side factors which have contributed to a lot of inflation in the domestic market. And whenever supply side factors contribute to inflation, we'll simply say it is nothing but cost to push inflation. It is nothing but cost to push inflation. Please remember this. Sir, why it is relevant for UPSC? Simple. If UPSC will ask you a question like this, in recent times, which of the following factors have contributed mainly to inflation in the domestic market? I repeat, which of the following factors have contributed mainly towards the inflation in the domestic market? It will be the supply side factors. Demand side factors also have contributed, but not to the extent of supply side factors. And that is the reason you will see that inflation in the domestic market, both WP as well as CPI, have remained above 4%. Now under the MPFA, we are supposed to target CPI. What has happened to CPI? For majority period in the last 1 year, again if you talk about let's say calendar year, for majority period in the last 1 year, starting let's say from January till the month of October, the inflation rate in the domestic market, that is a retail inflation, was more than 6%. And don't even be bothered about WPI because the WPI was much higher compared to the CPI. But very recently in the month of November, December 2022 calendar year, the inflation rate has cooled down. It has come below 6%. Having said so, please remember this. Even RBI very recently published monetary policy review stated that core inflation is still a concern. Core inflation is sticky and it's still a concern. And that is the precise reason against the expectation of many of the experts in the domestic market who stated that we might see an end to the hike in the repo rate cycle. RBI in fact increased the repo rate by 25 basis points in the recently concluded monetary policy. So the WPI has been much higher. It in fact reached to the extent of more than 13%, 14% in the domestic market. But CPI has been ranging above 6% for majority period of the time, but now has started coming down below 6% or has fallen below 6%. Now why this kind of a movement has been seen, why this rectangle is provided, etc., we'll understand after some time. But before that, please understand this carefully. Whenever there is a higher WPI, wholesale price index, what is the reason? Simple, right? The fuel prices have jumped upwards, right? The mineral prices such as steel have jumped upwards. The freight transportation, the cost of freight transportation has increased upwards, causing inflation, that is basically WPI. Now please understand this. Whenever you see there is a rise in the WPI consecutively, or there is a consistent rise in the WPI, generally you will see there is an impact on the CPI as well. It's a simple logic. Whenever there is a continuous WPI observed in the market, it doesn't have any option but to have an impact on even the CPI, pull up the CPI. And that is the reason you will see that WPI will react very quickly to certain rise in the prices of commodities such as fuel, steel, etc. Following that, after consistently remaining higher, following that you will see a rise in the CPI. That is exactly what has been happening in the domestic market. Now, what has been the situation in the context of WPI? WPI basically is broken down, that is 697 commodities are broken down into three groups. One is manufactured products, second one is fuel and power, third one is primary articles. And the comparison given in the table, you can just make an observation saying that in the context of primary articles as well as fuel and power, the inflation, that is the rise in the prices, has been higher. But if you compare the manufactured products, rather than observing a rise in the prices of the commodities, in the WPI, within the manufactured product grouping, there has been a decline in the price rise. In simple terms, the contribution to WPI has been driven by the primary articles as well as fuel and power, not so much regarding the manufactured products. And again, the reason is simple. If you talk about the financial year 23, in 21 and 22, because of the pandemic, there was a sudden rise in the prices of all of these commodities. But come to financial 23, there was a suppressed demand in many of these international markets, so that is developed economies, because of the fear of slowdown and recession as well as inflation, right? And that is the precise reason you will see the rise in the prices of manufactured products has been lowering rather than increasing. It has been lowering, whereas in the context of fuel and power primary articles, there has been an increase in the prices under the WPI. Now, what has Government of India done in order to contain the prices of these inputs? Because understand the logic here. If the prices of the inputs will keep on rising, if they go on going upwards, that will contribute automatically to WPI. And if WPI sustainably remains higher, it will contribute to CPI. So what has the Government of India done? That is within the domestic market, what has the government done? One, government has reduced the taxes on fuels. That is basically, if you talk about, let's say, petrol and diesel, the government has actually reduced the prices of the petrol as well as diesel. Now, before anybody of you or any one of you points out that, sir, how can Government of India reduce the prices? the actual, or let's say if you speak technically, the government has reduced the taxation on the fuels, and that is the precise reason the fuel prices has actually come down, and that has contributed to reduction in the cost of transportation, basically reflective in a policy that will be used by the government to control WPI. Second, government also has reduced the taxes on imports of various raw materials that are associated with plastic industry. Plastic is a very, very important input. And government of India, by reducing, again there are multiple types of plastics. You don't have to by heart the types of plastics here. So government, by reducing the taxation on the imports of various raw materials used in the plastic industry, the input cost has actually been reduced, and as a result of this, the output cost automatically has come down. To benefit the textile sector, government has reduced the customs duty also, that is waived off the customs duty. Logic is simple, either you talk about plastic industry or textile sector, the inputs, whenever they are imported, the importers are supposed to pay taxes to the government. If government will waive off or reduce the taxes, automatically the input cost will come down, which will help in controlling the output price, which will help again in controlling the rise in the prices. And duty on the diamonds also have been reduced. Right? So these are the various reforms that the government of India has taken in order to control WPI. Now this is regarding WPI. What about CPI? What has the government done in the context of CPI? If you look at the CPI under various headings, that is basically headline inflation, food inflation as well as core inflation, you will realize that the core inflation has been steady and not lower than or around 4%, but it has been just around 6%, and that is a very, very important cause of concern. Now what is the core inflation? It's very simple. If you take, let's say, CPI, and if you remove the commodities which are associated with food as well as fuel articles, right? Why? The prices of food and fuel are very much volatile in the market, unstable. So what I'll do, I'll simply remove the prices, or I'll basically discount or exclude the food and fuel commodities and calculate the prices rise for remaining commodities. That is called as core inflation. Now why does RBI say in the recently concluded monetary policy review that core inflation is very important and very sticky? It is for a very simple reason. Have a look at how the core inflation has actually moved. Rather than coming down, core inflation has held steady around 6%, which means in the market there are certain commodities whose prices are unstable. You have removed them from the CPI basket, but even after that, the prices of the remaining commodities are also very high. The prices or the commodities whose prices you generally expect to be stable, they are also increasing at, let's say, overall more than 6% or around 6%. That is very much a cause of concern. So core inflation has been around 6% cause of concern. What about headline inflation? Headline inflation has taken a dip. It has increased, but again in the recent times has actually cooled down. Right? What about food inflation? Food inflation has been waxing and waning, and the reason is simple. The supply of the food commodities, not only in the domestic market but also in the international market, has been affected, and that has contributed to the food inflation in the domestic market. But having said so, if you read the recent print for the food inflation, the supply has started stabilizing in the domestic market. Food inflation is coming under control. Now what are the causes? What are the causes of CPI overall? I hope you understand this. Overall CPI, what are the causes why there is a inflation, a higher rate of CPI in the domestic market? One, there is food inflation. Again, what are the causes of food inflation? I'll have a separate discussion, just give me some time. The prices of food commodities have started rising upwards. Now some of you will ask me, sir, why? I'll have a separate discussion, just give me some time. Second one is rupee depreciation. And before going forward, please understand, many of these factors which have written separately, which are causes of the overall inflation in the domestic market, are also contributors for the food inflation. Because in the next slide, when I discuss food inflation, don't be confused as to, sir, why are you discussing same factors under overall CPI as well as food inflation? Because I'll give a very simple example. Imagine you're manufacturing this particular pen and you will import certain raw material. And if rupee depreciates, obviously the cost of raw material will rise up, and that will push up the market prices, contributing to retail inflation. On the other hand, if you are going to import, let's say, fuel, and fuel is used for the transportation of food commodities, as a result of rupee depreciation, the cost of the transportation will increase, which is going to contribute to food inflation. So these factors will not only contribute to overall inflationary trends, these can also contribute to food inflation as well. Please do not be confused. So rupee has depreciated. There should not be any confusion in your mind whether rupee has depreciated or appreciated in the last 1 year. Fact is simple, rupee has depreciated. And when rupee depreciates, automatically the cost of raw materials, right, the cost of imports, etc. have become costlier. And that has contributed to inflation. There have been supply disruptions in the international market as well as in the domestic market. Right, in certain seasons, or let's say in certain areas, right, there have been uneven rainfall, unseasonal rainfall. Lower rainfall has been observed in certain states which are cultivating rice very recently. Tomato, which is a very important staple food for you as well as me. Either you want to call it as a tomato or tomato, doesn't matter, it's a vegetable. Right, so that vegetable, which is a staple food for most of the households in India, there was a supply disruption. So all of these have contributed to inflation in the domestic market. Now some of you will simply say, sir, you are talking about supply disruption in the context of food inflation. How can you write supply disruption in overall inflation? I'll give a very simple example. During the pandemic, the supply of certain commodities was disrupted. It was disrupted. Best example, steel. Right, India is one of the very, or let's say countries which are dependent on the steel imports like this. And whenever there is a supply disruption, or let's say because of the pandemic in China, exports from China have been affected. So don't you think supply disruptions overall will be contributing to inflation in the domestic market? Then the cost of inputs also has increased, either because of the rupee depreciation or the supply of these inputs. Automatically there has been a lower supply in the international market, and that has contributed to let's say the inflation in the domestic market. And imports also have become very costly. Right, for example, fertilizer, right, inputs such as related to fertilizer, or gas for that matter, crude oil for that matter. Now some of you will simply say, sir, how 0.2 and 0.4 are different? Please understand this. 0.2, 0.4, 0.5, they might simply look one and the same, but please understand, in a different context you will realize that okay, these are not one and the same, these could be contributing. For example, let's say 1 rupee is equal to $1 is equal to 60 rupees, $1 is equal to 70 rupees, which means rupee has depreciated. Now if one barrel cost remains the same, one barrel of crude oil cost remains same, $1, then automatically rupee depreciation has contributed to higher prices in the imports. Agreed. But what if for one barrel of crude oil, rather than $1, because the supply has become lower, the price will become $2? At the same point of time when rupee is depreciating, don't you think the rising prices of the commodities in the international market automatically will contribute to the higher cost of imports? So these are the various factors which have caused the inflation in the domestic market. Now you can simply say it is also imported inflation. I hope you understand. Whenever the prices of the commodities which we are importing go up, either because the prices in the international market have gone up or rupee has depreciated, the imports are going to contribute to inflation. That is called as imported inflation. Now specifically within inflation, that is CPI inflation, food inflation has been discussed in the economic survey. Now if you look at CPI, there are multiple components, there are multiple groupings as such. The highest weightage within the CPI has been given to food and beverages, around 46%, 45.8% to be precise, at around 46%. And the second highest has been given to miscellaneous. Now please remember the weightages. Why it is important? The food inflation in the domestic market has been higher. Simple. There has been a lot of food inflation or a higher rate of food inflation which has contributed, which has translated into higher CPI inflation. If you see this, right, you will realize that the highest contributor to food inflation highest contributor to the CPI inflation, that is retail inflation, has been the component of food and beverages itself. It has remained very high in the financial year 21, 22 as well as the current financial year, that is 23. Now what are the causes? Same factors talk in the context of, let's say, food articles here. For example, rupee depreciation, it will contribute to the higher cost of imports. But what if you are going to import certain commodities, let's say such as palm oil? I hope you understand. India is heavily dependent on import of vegetable or edible oils. One of them is palm oil itself. And very recently it was there in the newspaper as well. So palm oil, you are dependent on the imports. So what if Indonesia will cut off export of palm oil, which they are trying to do now because they are concerned about domestic inflation. So if Indonesia will cut off the export of palm oil, or let's say reduce the export of palm oil, because it is one of the biggest exporters in the international market, automatically supply will go down, prices will go up, and because India is dependent on the imports, automatically it will contribute to higher prices in the domestic market. Having said so, please understand this, in the recent months, because the supply of edible oils has been higher in the domestic market, the prices have cooled down. But if you look at in the last 1 year, have these imports related to agriculture sector, have they contributed to food inflation? Answer is simply yes. So one, rupee depreciation. Second, supply disruptions also have been causing the food inflation in the domestic market. Cost of inputs have started increasing, that is also contributing to food inflation, as well as the imports also causing food inflation. So these are some of the causes which have contributed to food inflation. Now, what measures have been taken by the government to control food inflation? One, government at various points of time either has imposed certain export restrictions or has banned exports altogether. Again, you don't have to by heart the list of all the commodities, it's a huge list. For some of the commodities, there are export restrictions, how much you are supposed to export, the process that you are supposed to follow, etc. And in the context of certain other commodities, Government of India has simply banned, not allowed exports at all. Second, in some of the exports, in order to reduce the exports, I hope you understand, Government of India has increased the duties. That is, please understand this. Whenever you want to disrupt or reduce the exports, one way is to what? Import restrictions in terms of quantity, or impose restrictions in terms of quantity. Second one is ban altogether export of these commodities. Third one is, just to make it much more costlier, impose higher taxes, higher duties on these commodities. Argument is simple. You are also exporting, but now you'll have to pay higher taxes, which will push up the market price. It will become lesser competitive, or competitiveness of the commodity will come down in the international market. So the importer sitting in the other country now feels that you are exporting at a higher price, automatically demand for your commodities will come down. So increase in the duties in order to ensure that supply in the domestic market increases and exports will become less competitive also has been taken. Reduction in the import duties, such as on pulses such as masoor, the reduction in the import duties will make it much more cheaper to import for us, and automatically imports will increase in the domestic market. Inclusion of some of the commodities in the Essential Commodities Act. Under the Essential Commodities Act of 1955, right, for example, soy meal has been included as an essential commodity act, or as an essential commodity under the ECA 1955. Whenever it is included under the ECA, logic is simple. Government can regulate regarding the production, distribution as well as supply of these commodities once they are included as a part of essential commodity. And as a result of this, you will also see that government is also imposing what should be the stock limits for certain commodities, so that the supply will increase. There is no hoarding activity that is conducted by the middlemen. Right, so these are some of the reforms that the Government of India has taken in order to control domestic inflation, that is specifically CPI. Now coming to this particular part of the graph, why this rectangular box is provided? That is, you will see that for certain time period, WPI is increasing at a very fast pace. CPI is actually nose diving or reducing. In certain time period, CPI is increasing, WPI is also increasing, maybe at the same pace or at different pace. But at certain point of time, you will see that is specifically after June 2022, the WPI is declining, CPI also is varying, slightly rising and again declining, but at a different pace altogether. And at one point of time, there is basically a crossover between WPI as well as CPI. In simple terms, there is a divergence as well as the convergence that has been observed between both the WPI as well as CPI. And please understand this. Some of you might be feeling, sir, both of them should move in the same direction at the same pace. Why are they not moving? A reason is simple. It could be because of the difference in the composition of both the WPI as well as CPI. It could be because of a different base year. It could be because of the base effect. It could also be because of the WPI doesn't include services, CPI includes services. And in the recent times, economic survey says service inflation is actually there in the domestic market. And because that is there, obviously CPI will be reacting differently compared to WPI. So because of various factors, you will see that, right, the WPI as well as the CPI will either converge or diverge. That is basically the point of discussion here. So these are the various points which the economic survey has mentioned regarding inflation. Now the next topic that I'll be discussing is regarding agriculture sector. What does the survey say regarding agriculture? Please observe the graph here. The graph will basically indicate what is the growth rate in the agriculture sector. And the point that you need to remember is very simple here. Even during the pandemic, agriculture sector was one of the sectors which registered a positive growth rate. Please remember that. I repeat, even during pandemic, right, agriculture sector was one of the sectors which registered a positive growth rate. And as per the survey, in the last 6 years, agriculture sector on an average has registered a growth rate of around 4.6%, which is very, very impressive. Considering in the last 2 years, India has suffered because of the pandemic, various sectors within the economy has suffered because of the pandemic. And not just that, Government of India has taken various measures in the last 6 to 7 years, or let's say 8 years since 2014, which has contributed to growth in the agriculture sector. And please make a point here, or remember this particular point. Generally, more than 45% of the working population in the domestic market, because it is concentrated in the agriculture sector, how the agriculture sector performs has a lot of repercussions or a lot of implications. Because number of households which are dependent on the agriculture sector, very, very high. The number of population, or let's say number of people who are counted as poor involved in the agriculture sector, very, very high. Right? Agriculture sector doesn't guarantee fixed amount of incomes, etc. Considering all these factors, reforms that the Government of India has taken in the agriculture sector has contributed to growth in the agriculture sector, and government, even in the budget for the next financial year, right, Government of India has announced a lot of reforms in the agriculture sector. Now, what are the certain important points that economic survey makes regarding agriculture sector? First one, government has post 1998 introduced the concept of Kisan Credit Card. Under the Kisan Credit Card, the survey says that we have provided loans to, or we have covered 3.8 crore farmers. As of almost the end of the calendar year 2022, we have covered 3.89 crore eligible farmers. And this is important. Important for a very simple reason. In the agriculture sector, farmers are dependent for cultivation on credit. And as per RBI survey itself, most of the credit that goes into agriculture sector, or let's say the rural market, it is from informal sector, where the rate of interest are exorbitant in the range of 24% to 36%. Recollection methods are most of the times illegal, etc. In that context, if you see that Kisan Credit Card has ensured that it will be covering lot of farmers, more and more farmers are being covered, and the credit facility is being provided. And very recently, 2018-2019, Government of India has expanded the coverage of the Kisan Credit as well. Now, even the people who are involved in the allied sectors such as fisheries are eligible to get loans under the Kisan Credit Card. That is point number one. Point number two, government also has launched modified interest subvention scheme. Now, what is the idea of a interest subvention scheme, which has been revamped, and now they call it as a modified interest subvention scheme? What is the logic? Simple. If a farmer takes an agriculture loan, under this initiative, the farmer will be given loan at 7% rate of interest. Generally, the loans are given at 9%, but for a farmer, the loans for the agriculture sector are given at 7%. And if you are a farmer who will make a prompt repayment of these agriculture loans, then the government under the modified interest subvention scheme will ensure that further 3% interest subvention is provided to you, which reduces the effective rate of interest on the loans to 4%. Which means you will take a loan, but you will not be paying 7% rate of interest. You will actually be paying 4% rate of interest on these loans. 3% will be provided by the government itself. So that is modified interest subvention scheme. Now the third very important point as to what Government of India has done to promote agriculture sector in the recent times is increase the total amount of agriculture credit. Generally in the budget, which is announced annually by the government allocates or keeps a target of how much agriculture credit should be provided in 1 year. And if you just have a look at it, in the last 5 to 6 years, there has been a consistent rise in the total credit that is allocated by the government to agriculture sector. Now from 21-22, if you basically look at the latest data for 23 and 24, Government of India has further increased it to 20 lakh crore rupees, one of the highest. 20 lakh crore rupees has been allocated in the form of agriculture credit in the next one financial year. Now have a look at this. On one side, government ensures that farmers will be able to get access to institutional credit. Farmers will also get interest subvention, and the amount of credit which is allocated to agriculture sector automatically has increased. Now, if Government of India is taking so many reforms to promote agriculture sector, and agriculture sector grows at an average of 4.6% in the last 6 years, what is one of the natural outcomes in the agriculture sector? The private sector investment in the agriculture sector has actually started crowding in. Please make a note of this. The private sector investment, in simple terms, private sector companies which are investing in agriculture related activities, there is a rise in the private sector investment. Crowding in means investments are coming in, crowding out means investments are going out. So in the last couple of years, you will see that there is a consistent rise in the amount of investment, let's say, done by the government in the agriculture sector. And in addition to this, because the private sector has more confidence in the performance of the agriculture sector, even the private sector investment in the agriculture sector has started crowding in, started increasing. And that is very much relevant. Next, what are the other reforms, other initiatives that the Government of India has taken in the agriculture sector? One, Government of India has launched Pradhan Mantri Kisan Samman Nidhi, PM Kisan Initiative. Under PM Kisan Initiative, government basically provides 6,000 rupees worth of income support. Remember this. It provides 6,000 rupees worth of income support. In 3 installments of 2,000 rupee each, 6,000 rupees is transferred into the bank account of the farmers. And as per the data given in the survey, as of now, 11.3 crore farmers are covered under the PM Kisan Initiative. And in the last 3 years, since its launch, more than 2 lakh crore rupees worth of income support has been transferred by the government to the farmers. That is the first very important initiative that the Government of India has taken to promote agriculture sector. Second very important initiative, Agriculture Infrastructure Fund, AIF. Under Agriculture Infrastructure Fund, right, which has been launched from 2019 and 2020 by the Government of India for a period of 13 years till 2032 and 2033. Government of India set aside 1 lakh crore rupees. Remember this, 1 lakh crore rupees for the development of infrastructure related to agriculture. What kind of infrastructure? Post-harvest infrastructure. Simple. Post-harvest infrastructure. For example, warehousing. Very simple. Warehousing, sorting and grading, warehousing, etc. The reason is simple here. one of the factors which is contributing to, let's say, the losses of agriculture commodities, horticulture commodities in India is we do not have sufficient amount of infrastructure, especially let's say logistics infrastructure, sorting and grading infrastructure, storage infrastructure, etc. And under the agriculture infrastructure fund, Government of India says, I will keep aside 1 lakh crore rupees. In fact, for loan up to certain amount, interest subvention is also provided, right? So Government of India says, I will promote post-harvest infrastructure under this initiative. And since the inception of this initiative, an amount of more than 13,000 crore rupees has been sanctioned for agriculture related infrastructure in the country, which covers more than 18,000 projects. That is another very important initiative. Third one is Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana. Simple. Under the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, which is one of the largest crop insurance programs around the world, right, the number of applications are averaging around 5.5 crore. Under the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, the objective is very simple. Only part of the insurance premium will be asked to be paid by the farmer, and that is lowest, 1.5% in certain crops, 2% in certain crops, 5% in horticulture crops, etc. So Kharif, Rabi respectively, right? Kharif, Rabi respectively, 1.5, 2% and 5%. Remaining premium will be paid by the central government as well as the state government. So one of the largest crop insurance programs around the world. Number of the applications, or let's say the subscriptions under this average 5.5 crore, and that's a very, very good number. So the largest crop insurance scheme in the world averages 5.5 crore applications every year, and it is the third largest in terms of premium received by the farmers. Okay. Next initiative, E-NAM, E-National Agriculture Market. The logic is simple here. Unlike the earlier system where the farmer used to take the crop from one market to another market, traders used to go from one market to another market to purchase crops, etc., which will lead to, let's say, inefficient price discoveries, multiple license requirements, etc. Now, Government of India has made the system online, and the portal through which they are basically providing these services is the concept of E-National Agriculture Market. Under the E-National Agriculture Market, the farmers have to simply list their commodities in the portal. Traders don't have to take multiple licenses. Only one pan-India license is more than sufficient. Charges will be much, much lower. There will be transparency in price discovery, etc., etc., etc. Now, under the E-NAM initiative, as of 31st December 2022, more than 1.7 crore farmers and 2.3 lakh traders have been registered on the portal. That is basically an improvement over a period of time. So that is one more very important initiative. And finally, government in recent times has been promoting the concept of organic farming as well as natural farming under the Pradhan Mantri initiatives, right? That is Paramparagat Krishi Vikas Yojana. Government of India is promoting organic farming as well as natural farming. In fact, under natural farming, one of the components which has been launched under the Paramparagat Krishi Vikas Yojana provides assistance, that is incentives, if the farmer adopts natural farming, so that whatever expenses are incurred by the farmer because they are adopting natural farming, certain cost will be covered through this initiative. And the objective is simple here. Whenever you shift from, let's say, the traditional agriculture, traditional in the sense right now we are using a lot of fertilizers, chemical fertilizers, either to organic or let's say natural farming, the consumption of fertilizers automatically, that is chemical fertilizers mind you, automatically will come down. Soil pollution will come down, right? The incomes of the farmers over a period of time, these are expected to increase, yield is expected to increase, etc. So these are some of the various factors that are attached to the concept of organic farming as well as the natural farming, which is being promoted by the government now. Now, apart from this, what about millets? Government of India has been promoting millets, that is nutri-cereals now, right? So the millets are basically one of the types of crops, that is basically the grasses with seeds, certain types of seeds like this, which are being promoted by the government. Even the United Nations has announced the International Year of the Millets. The argument that the government of India puts forward is, whenever we are going to cultivate millets or produce millets like this, and India is one of the largest producer of the millets, mind you, the yield per hectare in case of India is much higher or higher compared to the global average, right? That is very important factor to remember. Second one is, if you compare how much of the total Asia's production of millets is done by India, 80% of the production of millets in Asia is done by India itself. And India produces around 20% of global millet production. Keeping in mind all these factors, Government of India has called some of these millets as nutri-cereals and is basically promoting the production as well as export as well as the consumption of these millets in the domestic market as well as international market. And in the context of the promotion itself, Government of India has launched multiple schemes to promote the millet production. Now, apart from this, there is a certain discussion regarding cooperatives as well. Very recently, cooperatives has been there in the discussion for various reasons. For example, Government of India in 2021 announced that they would be setting up a Ministry of Cooperation, which is actually functioning now, and has proposed various initiatives such as cooperatives for seeds, cooperative for export of the commodities which are produced by agriculture cooperatives, cooperative for multiple reasons. And apart from this, it has also proposed a university for cooperation or university of cooperation, which should be set up in the domestic market to provide certain, let's say, certain manpower which will promote the growth of cooperatives in the domestic market. Now, as per the survey, there are around 8.5 lakh registered cooperatives in the domestic market. And the data is important for a simple reason. Cooperatives play a very important role, especially in rural part of India. Please remember that. Cooperatives play a very important role, especially in the rural part of India. Not so much comparatively, not so much in the domestic market, but rural part, large population is associated with cooperation or various cooperatives. And the total number of members in the cooperatives as per the survey is 29 crore people. And right, as per the data given in the survey, 90% of the villages in India has at least one cooperative. And remember this, when I say this, it also means that the villages can have more than one cooperative as well. I hope you understand this. Villages can also have more than one cooperative. Now, what is the importance of cooperatives? Cooperatives, especially the rural part of India, provides employment, provides inputs, for example, fertilizer, seeds to the agriculture sector, provides credit to the agriculture sector, etc. So, cooperatives in rural part of India are very relevant. And as per the survey, around 19%, or else just to make it simpler, around 1/5 of the total credit that goes to agriculture sector flows through the cooperatives. And specifically within the cooperatives, the most important ones are primary agriculture credit societies. Remember this, PACS. Primary agriculture credit societies are very vital for the functioning of the cooperatives, specifically in rural part of India, that is at the village level. Now, in the context of cooperatives, what has been done by the government? Government of India has amended Multi-State Cooperative Act. Government of India has proposed digitization in the cooperatives now. Government of India has basically asked for the preparation of database of all the cooperatives, specifically targeting PSES. And Government of India also set up a separate Ministry of Cooperation so that cooperatives can be promoted. There will be a dedicated ministry to focus on this. And very recently, Government of India has also stated that they will have a model cooperation policy, which shall be accepted by all the states so that there is uniformity in the cooperation policy of all the states, and the promotion of cooperations shall be done at every state level. So these are some of the very important points related to the reforms that have been implemented by the government to promote cooperatives in the domestic market. Now, apart from this, food processing sector. Food processing sector is relevant, important for a very simple reason. One, it basically will reduce the amount of losses in the agriculture sector. if I can process the food grains or process something related to agriculture sector, wastages are automatically expected to come down. That is point number one. Second, we expect more and more formalization because of food processing. More and more jobs would be created because of food processing. Forward and backward linkages, right? Let's say in the context of logistics sector, in the context of packaging, warehousing, sorting and grading, etc., will also be created. And in addition to this, the exports would be promoted because of food processing industries. So, citing this, Government of India in the recent times has implemented certain reforms. What reforms? One, Pradhan Mantri Kisan Sampada Yojana. PMKSY, Pradhan Mantri Kisan Sampada Yojana. It is an umbrella initiative. Remember that. What do you mean by umbrella initiative? Under umbrella initiative or umbrella scheme, multiple schemes are actually present. I hope you understand. Imagine there is a scheme A, and under scheme A, multiple schemes are launched by the government. This A is referred to as umbrella scheme. The best example for an umbrella scheme is Pradhan Mantri Kisan Sampada Yojana. And under that, multiple schemes are there. For example, mega food parks, cold chain warehousing, etc. So under the Pradhan Mantri Kisan Sampada Yojana, 677 projects have been completed till 31st December 2022. In addition to this, Government of India has also launched production linked incentive covering food processing industry. Right? Covering food processing industry, more than 10,000 crore rupees allocation has been done under the production linked incentive to promote food processing industries in India. Apart from this, there is also initiative by the name of Pradhan Mantri Formalization of Micro Enterprises. The argument that has been put forward by the government is the presence of micro enterprises in the food processing sector are very, very high. More than 25 lakh micro food processing centers are actually present. Now some of you will be concerned. You will simply say, sir, what do you mean by micro food processing industry? Under the industries, you will have a classification called as a micro, small and medium enterprises. If you look at based on the investment, based on the turnover, you will realize that micro enterprises are the ones which are smallest in terms of employment generation, smallest in terms of turnover, investment as well as competitiveness. Government of India says we want to make these micro enterprises, one, increase the scale, become competitive. In that context, right, they one need to be registered, they need to be formalized now. And second, we need to ensure that certain assistance will be provided to these micro enterprises so that they can adopt better technology, produce more, sell more, become competitive. And in this context, Government of India has launched Pradhan Mantri Formalization of Micro Enterprises, where the target is to formalize more than 2 lakh micro enterprises. As of 31st December 2022, 15,095 loans valuing up to 1,400 crore have been sanctioned under PM-FME. Now apart from this, there is a small discussion related to food subsidy. During the pandemic, we saw that the food inflation was actually increasing. In order to provide certain relief to the needy people which were getting affected because of the pandemic as well as food inflation, Government of India launched Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana, PMGKAY. Now the issue related to PMGKAY, again not the welfare concept, I am talking about economic concept here. The issue related to PMGKAY was that under this the food grains are provided free of a cost, which will ensure that the food subsidy of the Government of India will balloon, will automatically increase. And that is the reason you will see that in the last 2 years, the food subsidy bill of Government of India has been very, very high. And please understand this, right? Don't say, sir, how cruel you are, how inhumane you are, etc. I am talking strictly from the economics point of view here. This subsidy is unsustainable. Simple, this subsidy is unsustainable. You cannot keep on spending so much amount of a subsidy on food, on fuel, right, or let's say on fertilizers, etc. These are unsustainable subsidies. And citing this only, Government of India very recently has announced that PMGKAY will be subsumed under National Food Security Act, NFSA, right? Which means, right, the PMGKY as a separate component will not be implemented in addition to NFSA. That will be subsumed under NFSA, and food grains under NFSA will be provided free of a cost now. Right? If you are still confused, the logic of the government is very simple. Earlier under NFSA, food grains were provided at a very cheaper rate, subsidized rates. Rice was issued at 3 rupees. Wheat was issued at 2 rupees. Coarse grains, right, were issued at 1 rupee per kg. Now that will not be provided. Rather, for this 1 year, it will be provided free of a cost. 5 kgs per person will be provided free of a cost, but separate entitlement will not be provided under Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana. So that is the component related to food subsidy discussion provided in the survey. So one, we have covered sector of inflation. Second one, the concept of agriculture sector. Third one, the fiscal policy, important. The third one coverage or third area of coverage in the survey that we will make is fiscal policy. Now two very important policies. One is a fiscal policy, second one is a monetary policy. Some of you will ask me, sir, what is the basic idea of fiscal and monetary policy? Simple. Whenever the government will take decisions regarding expenditure and taxation, these are called as fiscal policy. Is the logic okay? I'll repeat it again. Whenever the government takes a certain policy decisions related to taxation or expenditure, that is called as a fiscal policy. On the other hand, if Reserve Bank of India, I am using the term Reserve Bank of India, but technically it is MPC, Monetary Policy Committee. On the other hand, if the Monetary Policy Committee takes a decision either to increase, decrease or remain the same or keep the amount of money supply same in the economy, that is called as monetary policy. So just to put things in context here, 2 days ago, monetary policy decision was taken. On the 1st of February, fiscal policy decision was taken. I hope the concept is very clear to you now. Let me start with the fiscal policy here. Nothing much to discuss in monetary policy except the introduction of SDF as well as IBC. That will take it up later. In regard to fiscal policy, right, let's start with the concept of taxation here. In the concept of taxation, there are two very important components which have been discussed by the survey. One, government has been using the taxation on the fuels as a flexi fiscal policy tool. I repeat, the government has been using the taxation, right, on the fuels as a flexi fiscal policy tool. Now what do you mean by that? Simple logic. There has been certain time period in the recent times where the prices of the crude in the international market has gone down. Is it okay? Follow step by step. Prices of crude in the international market has gone down. And right, when the prices have gone down, India has been able to purchase the fuel at cheaper price. But please understand, in order to increase the amount of tax revenues, Government of India has increased the taxes on the fuels. Now some of you will simply oppose it, some of you will support it, some of you will simply say, sir, why did Government of India increase the taxes? Point is very simple here. This is also the time period where Government of India's expenditures overshot. Simple. Government of India's expenditure actually went beyond the budget estimates. For example, take fertilizer. Simple. Take fertilizer. The fertilizer subsidy that is allocated by the government in the last couple of years has been falling short of what is the actual expenditure. If you take the current financial year, government allocated just over 1 lakh crore rupees for fertilizer subsidy. But because of the prices of natural gas, because of the prices of commodities which are used for the production of fertilizers in the international market, thanks to Russia-Ukraine war, the prices of fertilizers actually went up. And thanks to rupee depreciation, further it contributed to rise of fertilizer prices in the domestic market. Now the question is simple here. Do you want the government to allow the prices of the fertilizers to shoot through the roof, or you want the government to provide subsidies and contain the prices of the fertilizer? And some of you might be thinking, sir, right, this is very problematic. What should we decide? I'll tell you what government did. Government provided more and more subsidies in order to ensure that farmers will not be paying higher amount of prices for these fertilizers. If government had basically left the market to decide based on the import price, rupee depreciation, etc., the prices of the fertilizers would have simply shot through the roof. And many of the farmers will not be able to purchase them. Even if they purchase, now the input cost would be higher. If the input cost is higher, don't you think that will contribute again to the supply side inflation in the domestic market? So keeping in mind all these factors, Government of India decided, let me provide more subsidies. Now if government says I will provide more subsidies, obviously revenue expenditure will increase. From where do you think government will get the money for it? So government said, I will increase the taxes on fuels. And please remember this. Generally the fuels are said to be having inelastic demand. Remember this particular term. Generally the fuels are said to be having inelastic demand. Meaning what? The prices will change, the demand will not change. Demand almost all the times will remain at the same level. And that is a precise reason government was able to impose the taxes, collect or impose higher taxes, collect more tax revenues, use it to provide for other revenue expenditures. But on the other hand, when the prices of the crude started increasing, which means import cost will be higher and that will contribute to higher market prices. Now, Government of India reduced the taxes on fuels, right? So that the customer or the buyer of the fuels in the market will not feel the complete burden. Certain relief was given by the government by reducing the taxes. So that is the reason the taxes on the fuels has been utilized as a flexi fiscal policy tool. Point 1. Second, government has introduced a GST, a wonderful initiative, a revolutionary indirect tax reform. We have completed 5 years. Now we are in the 6th year of implementation of GST. Has the shift, right, have a look at this, Economic Survey says, has the shift to the GST improved or worsened the buoyancy of indirect tax system? Now many of you will be worried about, one, sir, where is this useful? Second, what do you mean by buoyancy? Right, simple. Buoyancy simply means with the change in the GDP, with the percentage change in the GDP, that is very much relevant. With the GDP growth rate, how much is the growth rate in taxes? Is it okay? Right, that is with the change in the GDP, that is if the GDP grows by X percent, by how much percent tax receipts have grown. That measurement or that comparison is called as a tax buoyancy. Now don't you think based on this, right, keeping the numerator as tax receipts or percentage growth rate in the taxes divided by percentage growth rate in the GDP, if you have a higher tax buoyancy, it is simply good for the economy. It means tax receipts are growing at a faster pace compared to growth rate in the GDP. Now what has happened? Before I go to the point here, right, please make a note of this or remember this. Where can you utilize this? If UPSC will ask you a question on effectiveness of GST, not GDP, GST, you can write these concepts or you can write this point. You don't have to by heart the table, not necessary. But follow the discussion here. GST has been brought into force from the 1st July 2017. That's a very simple point. Now what this table does is, it makes a comparison of those taxes which were imposed and collected before GST, at what rate the collections have increased, and after the GST was implemented, many of these taxes have been subsumed under GST, at what rate the GST collection has increased. And for these time periods, I will calculate the tax buoyancy separately, which means 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 5 years till GST, at what rate the taxes have actually increased. That is basically, right, the taxes at the state level as well as central level. And after the GST, what has been the growth rate in the GST receipt collection. If the buoyancy of the indirect taxes collection, that is specifically GST, If it is higher after the implementation of GST, can I simply say GST has been successful in increasing tax receipt collection? And that is exactly what you will see. You will realize that the total amount of the taxes which have been subsumed under GST have grown at 11.5% before the introduction of GST, and the GDP for these 5 years has increased by 11.5%, 11.53%, 11.54%, which means tax buoyancy for 5 years, indirect taxes subsumed under GST, the tax buoyancy before the GST was 0.99. And do the same calculation for next 5 years after the implementation of GST, the tax buoyancy is 1.12%, which means the tax receipt collection after the introduction of GST has actually improved, which showcases the fact that GST has been successful, at least when you talk about, let's say, increased tax receipt collections. Please remember that particular point. Next, what about government expenditures? What about government expenditures? The government will spend money both under the revenue head as well as capital head. That's a factual information for you. Government spends money under the revenue head as well as capital head. But specifically, if you look at it, it is the capital expenditure which is very important to gauge what is the focus of the government to promote growth in the economy. I hope you understand. Again, I'm not saying that revenue expenditure, the government doesn't focus on growth. If government will spend money on, let's say, skilling initiatives, of course, yes, it is to focus on growth only. But if you talk about revenue expenditure as well as capital expenditure, between these two, which is the most important one to find out the quality of expenditure of the government, I would put my bet, or I would place my money on capital expenditure. Now, what has been the growth in the capital expenditure? And please remember one more point here. When you see that government is spending more and more expenditure, government is incurring more and more expenditure during the time period of, let's say, slowdown or recession, it simply indicates it is a counter-cyclical policy. I hope you understand my statement here. Whenever you see that government of India, or for that matter any government, is spending more and more money, right? The incurrence of expenditure is higher, it is increasing during a slowdown or a recession, it is basically an indicator of counter-cyclical fiscal policy. And whenever an economy goes through a recession, counter-cyclical fiscal policy is good, right? That is an important point here. Now, how do I prove that? Please have a look at the total capital expenditure incurred by the government, right? As a percentage of GDP, the financial year 21, it was 2.2%. For financial year 23, it is 2.9%. For financial year 24, Government of India set aside 10 lakh crore rupees. That's a very high number. Sir, one side you are talking about percentage, now you suddenly switch to the overall expenditure or exact number of expenditure. If you want to make that comparison, for the current financial year, Government of India has allocated 7.5 lakh crore rupees. For the next financial year, the budget estimate is 10 lakh crore rupees. By the fact that there has been a rise in the capital expenditure, it simply means government is focused on promotion of growth in the economy. And if you basically include even the component of revenue expenditure, that is GCCA, grants for creation of capital asset, the total amount of expenditure for assets for infrastructure by the Government of India for the next financial year will be more than 13 lakh crore rupees. And that's not a small amount. It's very high amount of expenditure. Right? So can you conclude and say that the policy of Government of India, especially during pandemic, has been counter-cyclical? Answer is, of course, yes, it has been counter-cyclical. Right? And apart from this, right, have a look at this. Out of the total expenditure of the Union government, how much is the capital expenditure? It has seen a sudden spike, sudden rise, especially from the financial year 21. Okay. Now, what about the revenue expenditure? One component is capital expenditure. What about revenue expenditure? Now, whenever you talk about revenue expenditure, there are certain components that you need to observe. For example, what about interest payment that is done by the government? Simple. What about the interest payment? Because understand the logic here. during the pandemic or even now, when the government basically spends more money, a large chunk of this money that the government spends will come from borrowings. And when government keeps on borrowing consistently higher amounts from the market, it also means the interest payment that the government does will also be higher. For example, if you look at the last year's budget estimates, this year's budget estimate as well as next year's budget estimate, you will realize that around 1/3 of the total income for that financial year as per the budget estimates comes from the market borrowings. And when the market borrowings are so high, right, and again please understand, historically they have been higher like this, the amount of interest payment that is done by the government annually will also be very high. What has been the trend in the context of India? The trend in the context of India is that the interest payment components have hit more than 30% now. Right? It was more than 35%. It had come down. It has started picking up, and now as per the document or as per the economic survey, the revenue expenditures, out of the revenue expenditure, if you talk about the interest expenditure or interest payment out of the non-debt receipts, just make a correction here, out of non-debt receipts, 41% is being used. And sir, what about the total out of revenue expenditure? Generally around 20 paisas or 20% of the total expenditure incurred by the government will be done in the form of interest payment itself. That's very, very high. We will have to reduce it. Second, what about basically other types of expenditures? As per the survey, as per the various other documents as well, for example, budget documents, Government of India has been spending a lot of money on subsidies. Food subsidy, fertilizer subsidy contribute to very, very high amount within the subsidy component within the revenue expenditure. Right? So that also you'll have to observe. Now, what reforms have been implemented by the government to improve the fiscal policy in the domestic market? One, Government of India has introduced the concept of a transparency. Introduced in the sense, government has taken various reforms in the recent times, which you can simply say will promote transparency in the system. Sir, for example, what? Earlier, there was a huge component of a borrowing that was done in the form of extra budgetary resources, extra budgetary borrowing, or the off-budget liability component as such. But the Government of India now says we'll start counting all of it. Whatever liabilities are there, because of that, we will try to repay it off, so that whatever is the debt, whatever is the fiscal deficit, etc., it becomes a much more reflective of actual fiscal position of the Government of India. So towards transparency we are moving now. Railway budget has been merged. Again, this is not a very new initiative. It's not the recent also. It has been more than 4 to 5 years since the merger of railway budget with the union budget, and that's a precise reason in the recently concluded or announced budget, you saw that railway budget was not announced separately, it was part of the union budget itself. Apart from this, again, one more old reform which has been mentioned here. Earlier we used to divide the expenditures done by the government into planned as well as non-planned expenditure, but government said it doesn't reflect the quality of expenditure incurred by the government, and that's a reason we have discontinued the concept of dividing the expenses into planned and non-planned. Rather, we have shifted to the capital as well as revenue expenses. And the Government of India earlier used to announce the budget on the last working day of February. Now it has been preponed to first working day of February, so as to ensure that by the time we enter into the next financial year, the budget is actually passed and the ministries will be allowed to withdraw the funds from the Consolidated Fund of India. So these are some of the important reforms that the Government of India has implemented at the central level. What about the finances of the state government? What about the finances? Right now, first and foremost, please understand, if you take the overall Indian economy, central government will spend money and states also spend money. But if you look at how much is the total expenditure of center on one side, total expenditures done by the states on the other side, generally around 60% plus of the total expenses are done in the Indian economy come from the states. And because of the pandemic, mind you, there was a lot of pressure on the finances of the state governments. lot of pressure on the finances. And that you'll basically be able to see when you look at the deficits of the state government or all the states government collectively as a percentage of the GDP. The deficit which was basically around 2.6% reducing, right, again 2.4 to 2.6% slight hike, basically shot up to 4.1% thanks to pandemic. And now, right, as per the financial year 23 budget estimates, the fiscal deficit of all the states put together is expected to be around 3.4%. As per fiscal responsibility documents, we are supposed to reduce it to 3% of GDP, and the total debt of the states is supposed to be reduced to 20% of GDP. Now, what about the states' combined fiscal deficit in this specific time period, April to November, last 1 year, and in the last, or let's say in the last calendar year or current financial year? And basically, this is the amount of expenditure that has been done, or let's say the fiscal deficit of all the states, right, which basically represents market borrowings done by the governments, that is the state governments. Now, that data is not important. You don't have to buy at the data. Right, what about the finances of the state? Right, what measures have been taken by the government, or what assistance has been provided by the government to improve the finances of the state government? One, regarding GST, please remember this. Please remember this. Compensation cess for financial year of fiscal 21 and 22 has been provided by the center. Now, why specifically this point has been provided separately compared to this point? Because some of you will simply say, sir, compensation cess is provided separately for fiscal 23, again 21 and 22. Why not write it as a single point? Reason is simple. One, this was the time period when the finances of the central government and state government were under a lot of pressure. The tax receipt collection under GST went down. So the compensation that was supposed to be paid by the central government went up or increased. So central government said, doesn't matter, I will borrow from the market and I will provide you for the GST compensation cess, which has been more than 2 lakh crore rupees. Center has borrowed and given it to states. That is point one. Second point, then why have you written financial year 23 separately? The reason is simple. GST compensation was supposed to be provided only for 5 years. Only for 5 years from the date of implementation of GST, which was implemented from 1st July 2017. And if you open the calendar and start counting it, 2022 June, that is end of June, was basically represented completion of 5 years of GST. So even in the current financial year, Government of India has front loaded and provided GST compensation to the states. And after June 2022, the compensation has been discontinued. I repeat, compensation has been discontinued. But please remember this point. Compensation cess is still there. Compensation has been discontinued because we have completed 5 years. Compensation cess is still being implemented by the government on certain commodities which come under the highest slab under GST. Now, what is the reason? Just think of it. What could be the reason? Even though we have discontinued compensation to the states, we still continue the cess that we are collecting on some of the commodities which are basically falling under the highest slab, that is 28%. What could be the reason? What is the answer? Please type it in the comment section below. Apart from this, the devolution that has been provided, the tax devolution. What is tax devolution? As per the Finance Commission, whatever out of the central divisible pool, how much should be given to, that is a tax divisible pool, how much should be given to the states. As per the 15th Finance Commission, it is 41% of the divisible pool. So government says we are front loading this 41%. Front loading means what? There are two terms that you generally come across, back loading and front loading. Backloading means you will transfer the funds but not in the initial part of the financial year. You will push it back to, let's say, third quarter or the fourth quarter. But if you say front loading, you could transfer the funds, that is the tax devolution can be given in the first quarter itself. Because understand this, the Finance Commission says 41% has to be provided when the dates are not given. What if the government will give it on the last working day in the month of March? That will also be counted as the same financial year. What if the government provides the same amount of money on the first working day of the current financial year? That is also in the same financial year. So government, in order to provide relief to the states, has been front loading the tax devolution. Next, borrowing limits have been improved. Right, understand this. Because all the states have borrowed from the center as per the Constitution of India. Whenever the states will borrow, they first have to take the permission of the center because they have the borrowings. They already have borrowed from the center. And the center, whenever they announce the union budget, the finance minister also announces how much of the borrowing limits are fixed for the states. For example, in financial year 21, it was fixed at 5% of GDP, that is as a state level. For financial year 22, it was reduced to 4%. For financial year 23, it has been fixed at 3.5%. For the next financial year, that is 24, again it has been fixed at 3.5% itself. So the government has enhanced the borrowing limits, especially during the times of stress, so that the states will be allowed to borrow more and take care of their expenses. Scheme for special assistance to states for capital investment. This is basically a 50-year interest-free loan. Simple. 50-year interest-free loan, where Government of India in the last year budget had allocated 1 lakh crore rupees. Of course, some of the component was tied funds, some of it was untied funds. Around 80,000 was untied funds, which would be distributed based on the tax devolution formula given by the Finance Commission. Remaining 20,000 crore was tied to certain, let's say, reforms or certain measures which would be taken by the states. Only then they would be getting these funds. Now for the current financial year, for the next financial year, the budget announcement is that this has been increased to 1.3 lakh crore rupees. 1.3 lakh crore rupees, right? So government has provided 50-year loans, interest-free loans for the states to incur in the form of capex. Next, what is the debt profile of the government? You will see that from financial year 20, the debt of the government actually shot up. Debt means basically the liabilities or how much money has been borrowed, how much has to be repaid. It has actually shot up. Now for financial year 22, it is somewhere around 56.2%. But please understand, overall liabilities are slightly different compared to the public debt. Meaning what? Whenever government has borrowed, it has to repay. But if the borrowing is done, charged on the consolidated fund of India, that is called as a public debt of the center. But if the government of India has borrowed from different sources, extra budgetary resources or public account liabilities, etc., if you put together all of this, this is called as the total liability or total debt of the government. But if you take the central government debt as well as the state government's debt as well, the sum total is called as the general debt. Is it okay? So the debt has been at a much higher level. What is the debt profile of the government? Again, I am talking about the central government here. The public debt is 121 lakh crore rupees. And the public account liabilities are around 12 lakh crore rupees. And extra budgetary resources are 1.39 lakh crore rupees. If you get the summation of all these three, the total liabilities of the central government comes at around 134 lakh crore rupees. 134 for financial year 22, which is higher compared to the previous financial year, which is higher compared to previous financial year. Which means the liabilities of the government of India have been ballooning. And the total debt of the government, that is the general government, is expected to be around 85% plus, which is at a higher level. Okay. Now, if you basically dissect the debt of the government of India, you will realize that most of the debt is internal in nature, that is a domestic in nature. Very small part of the debt is external in nature. And that's very important. Why? The debt, if it is very small component of it is external nature, then the government will not be facing external risk, that is exchange rate risk, because the borrowings will have to be repaid in terms of, let's say, dollars. Any movement in the exchange rate will have an impact on how much dollars or how many rupees you will have to pay to purchase a dollar. So because only a small component, that is less than 5% of the debt is external, the exchange rate risk that is borne by the government is very low. And second very important point is, in the recent times, the government has kept on issuing long-term G securities. As a result of it, the debt profile of the government, that is the repayment which will have to be done, where the 5-year bonds, 10-year bonds, 20-year bonds, 30-year or 40-year bonds will mature, you will realize that the maturity of the debt of the government of India has increased. If you look at the data given by the economic survey, the average maturity of the debt of government of India has increased from around 9.7 years to 11.7 years, which is again a very good indicator. Means what? Earlier, the average time period where the government would be repaying the debt was 9.7 years. Now it has increased to around 12 years, which means now government will have more time period to repay all of this debt back to the lenders in the market. That is another very important point. What about the general government finances? That is overall government, center plus states. The general government finances, like I've already told you, the total borrowings, that is basically liabilities of the central government plus state government, comes to around 86.5%. If you go as per the FRBM review committee, that is encasing review committee, by the time 23 was supposed to reach, as per the recommendations of FRBM review committee, the total liabilities of the center plus state was supposed to be around 60%. Out of that, around 38% would be of the central government and remaining would be of the state government. Now, because of the pandemic, because of the higher borrowings or the counter-cyclical policy of the government, that is at the center as well as the state, the liabilities of the government have actually increased, and these are at 86%. Now, is it a cause of concern? Of course, yes. Higher liabilities is always a cause of concern. But please understand, India is not the only country whose liabilities or general government liabilities have increased. That is point one. Second point is, it's not the policy choice of the government to increase the liabilities. This was because of a factor which was beyond the control of the government. That is, pandemic affected, and I did not have any choice but to increase the borrowings, which has contributed to higher liabilities of the center as well as state. Right, so these are certain important points regarding the fiscal policy of the government. Now next, regarding monetary policy, not much is there. That is relevant for UPSC, of course. I'll be covering two important concepts. One, what has happened to the movement of the rates, just observe it. And you will see there is one line which has started appearing in the recent times. Some of you can see this. You will realize that this orange color line was not present earlier, but now suddenly has appeared. That is point one. And second, this black color line, which was all along there historically, has disappeared after the orange line has appeared. What is the logic here? Again, related to UPSC, you don't have to by heart the movement of the graph. Right? All you need to simply understand is repo rate is a policy rate. Right? I hope you understand. Repo rate is a policy rate. And in recent times, right, the RBI, Reserve Bank of India, started increasing repo rate. And because the repo rate has been hiked, and if you see the news, observe it very carefully. Initially, RBI used to increase the repo rate by 50 basis points. For many months, or for many policies, they increase the repo rate by 50 basis points. Then it has been brought down to 35 basis points. And as per the recent monetary policy review, it has been further brought down to a hike of 25 basis points, taking the repo rate to 6.5%, which basically completes a cycle of hikes, because when Mr. Shaktikanta Das took over as the governor of RBI back in 2018, that is 4 years ago, repo rate was actually 6%. I hope you understand. In 2018, of course, don't try to find it in the graph here. If you look at the repo rate when Mr. Shaktikanta Das took over as the governor, it was 6.5%. And with the latest hike, again it has gone up to 6.5%, which means a rate cycle or rate hike cycle is complete here. We started with 6.5, reduced, we kept on increasing, we have reached the original point, that is 6.5%. That's point one. Second point, what is this? What is this new tool? STF, Standing Deposit Facility. Fixed reverse repo rate for all practical purposes is useless now, because under the reverse repo rate or under the tool of a reverse repo, there was involvement of G securities. Now RBI under the STF doesn't have to provide any collateral, and that's a reason why STF rate is much more prevalent now. Banks are using STF, and reverse repo rate for all practical reasons is useless here. Right, so this is the movement of rates in the domestic market. Now, apart from that, because of interventions or because of government borrowings in the domestic market, or higher amount of borrowings that is done by issuing government securities in the market, you will see that, right, the G security yields have actually gone up in the recent times, especially post April 21. You will see that there is a rising yield, and that is logical. It is very much logical, because government has kept on supplying more and more bonds. Supply has increased, the market prices will go down, obviously the yield rate will be higher. Apart from this, in this chapter, or in regarding monetary policy, or in the chapter of monetary policy, another relevant factor or another relevant concept is IBC, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, which has come into force from September 2016, right? It's been more than 6 years now. What has been the performance? The survey states that 5,893 cases, that is a corporate insolvency resolution process, have started under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. More than 3,900 have been closed. 1,900 are still going on. 1947, right, are still going on. Now, through what measures these have been closed, you don't have to be worried. UPSC will not ask you that. But a point to note here is, the survey says certain important changes have taken place after the introduction of IBC. What are the important changes? One, the behavior of the borrowers has actually changed. The behavior of the owners of the company has actually changed, and that's fact. And you can write this as a success or as a factor representing success of IBC. Why? Unlike earlier situation, under the IBC, both the creditor as well as the borrower, either of them can go to the NCLT, file an application for insolvency resolution. And when you say creditor, it could be a secured creditor or even unsecured creditor. Now, even if there is an unsecured creditor, let's say a raw material supplier to whom the company has not made the payment, owes money to them, they can simply go to NCLT, file a complaint. And because the complaint, let's say, is accepted or application is accepted, the owners might end up, or promoter might end up losing the ownership of the company. So the promoters are concerned, and that has basically led to change in the behavior of these promoters. Now they are concerned that they will end up losing the ownership, hence the behavior has actually changed. Now, apart from that, one more very important point mentioned is the recovery rates are improving. Recovery rates are much better compared to what was the recovery under SURFACE, what was the recovery under, right, various other earlier initiatives. So these are the important points which have been mentioned in the monetary policy chapter. Apart from this, I don't find anything else that is relevant for UPSC from this chapter. Let me go to another chapter, medium term growth outlook. Now the objective of the chapter is very simple. They have shown various reforms which have been implemented by the government in the past. And please understand, these reforms are implemented surrounding certain crisis in the economy. And very recently also there is a crisis in the Indian economy from which we are basically recovering. In fact, economic survey says recovery is complete, don't worry about, right, pandemic now. So argument is, does India have a potential to grow at a rate lower than the growth that we have achieved when earlier crises are over or were over, or today India is placed in a much better position wherein after the crisis or after coming out of the crisis, the growth of the economy will be much higher, much better compared to earlier growth. And just to answer this question in a nutshell, answer is yes. India today, the survey says, is better placed and will end up achieving better growth rate compared to what growth rates we achieved after crisis in the past. Sir, what do you mean by this? Simple. They have given two examples. The 1991 reforms, that is famously referred to as LPG reforms, liberalization, privatization and globalization reforms. The LPG reforms were implemented after a crisis in the Indian economy. For example, inflation rate was very high. Out of the total expenditure, more than 37% was used to pay interest payment itself by the government in the budget. Fiscal deficit was very, very high. The BOP crisis, right, we were basically on the verge of exhausting the forex reserves, etc. At that point of time, we implemented set of reforms, liberalization, privatization and globalization reforms. For example, we liberalized entry of the foreign investors in India. We allowed foreign companies to start operating. Many of these industries were delicensed, etc. So after a crisis, there was a reform that was implemented. And they will quote one more crisis during 97-98. Right, Asian crisis took place. Right, that is basically tiger countries or Asian tigers experienced currency crisis. Pokhran test was conducted. That also led to certain sanctions being imposed by USA or Western developed economies on Indian economy. So there was a crisis even after this particular period. So Government of India has implemented many reforms even after the crisis, right, or even during the crisis. And understand the logic here. The survey says the reforms which have been implemented by the government have helped the Indian economy to recover from the impact of these crises. For example, FDI reforms were introduced post 1991 in the Indian economy. After the sanctions were imposed and sanctions were withdrawn, we saw a huge spurt of investment in the form of FDI in the domestic market. Right, telecom sector policy was announced in 94, 98, and after that we have seen a large growth of foreign companies as well as, let's say, domestic companies in the telecom sector. Although again, in recent times, telecom sector has come under a lot of stress, but again, I'm not going back in the history. Just look at what has happened in the telecom sector, especially during the 2000-2010. There was a sudden investment, huge growth in the sector. Disinvestment as well as a privatization policy has been implemented by the government, which has helped private sector to get ownership of many of the companies which are earlier owned by the government. That has contributed to higher and higher investment in the domestic market. FRBM Act has been implemented, and as a result of this, more and more control on the expenditures has been implemented by the government, which has led to lowering of the fiscal deficit, lowering of the revenue deficit, etc. Right, government has been promoting infrastructure, banking sector reforms also have been implemented. Right, so basically under this, government has discussed crisis followed by reforms, crisis followed by reforms. And right, basically it says that because of these reforms which are implemented, Government of India's reforms have helped in economy recovering in a much better way. Now, right, what reforms has the Government of India implemented from 2014? Right, what kind of reforms? Right, so this particular discussion of reforms which have been implemented by the Government of India starting 2014, we will have a discussion regarding this in the next session. So let me stop the discussion today here. Next session we'll take it up from here. Then we'll discuss other important sectors covered in the economic survey, industries, services, external sector, etc., infrastructure, etc. Right, so this is the first part of the discussion of the economic survey for the year 22-23. We'll continue the discussion in the next week, same Friday 8 p.m. Please do join us for that session as well. If you like the initiatives that we have implemented and the initiatives that we have announced, please hit the like button. Provide your valuable comments in the section below. And if you are yet to subscribe to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS, why don't you go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Thank you. Have a great day.